So today is actually the last week's, the last but one class. So today we will talk about automation. I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for this. But then again, I said this before, I'm going to say it again. The scope of what we are going to discuss in the class as far as automation is concerned, it's not going to be really an end-to-end review of how QTP works or anything. See, when we saw Jira or Bugzilla or Qtest, we kind of looked at, everything about the tool. Of course, we didn't go into a greater level of detail, but we kind of got an overview, a look and feel, and, a kind of estimate about how the tool works and, in what situations we can put it to work. But in today's session, the focus is not really QTP. It's not really, us trying to learn QTP in any way. What we are going to try and understand today is what is automation, who does automation, when is it performed, why is it performed, what kind of scope does it have, and if you would like to do automation, how would you go about it? And as I was telling you earlier, when I came into testing initially in 2004 or something, and when I heard about automation testing for the first time, so automation is when a tool, a software like, a certain software system will actually test another software. So it's like, two machines talking to each other without you doing anything in the middle. In the middle. So that was kind of like a concept that was hard for me to visualize without even seeing it once. So those of you who are absolute beginners, I'm sure you will, relate to this scenario that I'm talking about. How can a tool perform testing? Has any of you wondered about that? I'm sure you have, and I know I have. So this is the kind of session that will give you an introduction, that will put an end to that wonderment about how a tool will perform testing in our place. So this is an introduction of sorts. And this is like, how we would say, like, testing the waters, whether or not we want to go in there. So that's what we will focus on for the majority of the class today. Of course, I'll also show you QTP and, how you can create a basic automation test and all that. But beyond that, we are not going to go into a greater depth is, all I want to let you all know. Now, tomorrow is the last session. Tomorrow in the class, we are going to talk about interviews and, how to tackle interviews and all that. So use this link if you have any questions that you want me to answer in the class tomorrow. Technical questions, of course, the technical topics have been dealt in the class and all that. So other than technical questions like, how to explain your choice, or even technical for that matter, if you have any question that you want me to answer in the class tomorrow, go ahead and submit that in there, and I will pick it up from there, and we will make sure that we answer all of them. And I got some of your resumes over the weekend. That's something I usually deal with at the end of the session. So I'm yet to review them. I will do it, and I will send you an update probably Wednesday or Thursday, like that, this week. And I also have some questions that are submitted to me via email. So all of that also will deal with at the end of the session today. So let's begin what automation is, why we are going to use it, and all that. So we'll start with considering a certain situation of sorts. So let's say you have an application ABC, and the current build or current version is 1. And this has scope or number of requirements that this one is implementing, let's say are 10 for now. And the number of test cases you ended up having are 100. And the number of testers on this team are 5. So we are going to consider this, and then we will say the number of days of testing. So the number of days it takes for you to test all of these 100 test cases, let's say, is 5. So let's try to work with these numbers. I know that these numbers don't look realistic in any way, but just for the sake of our example. And now going forward, these days, no business is built to just build once and use it for the rest of our lives. See, that's not how things work. There are different gadgets that are coming into the market. Business models keep changing. So it is imperative that business undergo a lot of change. And with the coming in of agile and many iterative and rapid development methodologies, the changes in versions or new versions, the changes in the existing builds are much more frequent, much more common than what it used to be before. So if we are looking at the same application ABC, and if we think that, if for just the sake of discussion here, there's a version 2, and the number of test requirements here, let's say 10 plus 5 new requirements have been added to this. So you're looking at 100 test cases plus 50 new ones, correct? So the number of testers will remain the same, of course. So the number of days of testing, so if you just do an equally proportionate, breakdown, it will be 7.5 days. And we'll see one more, release. Let's say it's release 3. And for this one, if we have 15 plus 5 new requirements, so we are looking at 150 plus 50 new ones, and we are looking at the same number of testers, and we are looking at number of days of testing is 10. So as you can see, as the width or as the breadth of the application keeps growing, as the application starts growing in magnitude, complexity and all that, the extent of testing is growing, right? Is growing directly proportional to that. Now, right now the situation doesn't look so out of control. So when you're looking at it over a period of 3 releases, the maximum number of days of testing you're looking at is 10 days. But when you bring the number of development days into picture, so let's say for 10 requirements it takes 10 days to develop, or 5 days only to develop. Okay, so if it is 5 new requirements that the development team is building, so it is just half the amount of the work for the first release. So we are looking at 2.5, so approximately 3 days, correct? Because it's just half the magnitude of work. And when it moves to the next release, even though the width of the application is growing up, even though the density of the application is growing, right here we are still looking at 3 or 4 days of, in fact, if you are going to calculate tightly, it's just 2.5 days of development. So when you bring in the number of development days into picture, do you think this is a positive vibe that we are looking at, team? It takes 3 days to develop and 10 days to test. Do you think any company in their right mind will approve a plan like this? No. So let's look at what are the possible solutions to this situation. What do you think we can do in order to reduce the time? Any thoughts, team? So think about it. There's no hurry. Take your time on this. But I really want you to come up with some ideas here. Automated testing, yes, but if the automation testing is, not even considered, so since we are not, even looking at automation at this point of time, let's see how we can solve this problem. Tina says we can increase the number of testers. That's a good one. So we can increase testers. The next thing, Soli's suggestion is we should reduce the extent of test cases that we consider. So we reduce the amount of testing that we're doing. So yes, these two are plausible solutions. But then the problem with these solutions is that in case 1, when you're bringing new testers, see, in release 1 you have 5-member team. Let's say in release 2 you're bringing 2 additional team members to handle the, the extent of work that is coming up in the second release. Now, aren't these 2 people practically like, complete, newcomers to the team situation? So they are not at least 1 release experience. They are going to have, you will have to include some time to bring these people up to speed. And then so that will again take some time, and then you will have to again, there is a risk that new team members might not test the way experienced team members would. And also when you're bringing in new people, that is also expenditure. Now why would you want to reduce the number of days? Because the more days you work on something, the longer you will have to budget the product. project. And the longer you budget the product, we are again looking at increased cost. So here there is an expenditure to add new people. Again, the quality of testing cannot be consistent. Then there is a training and everything that has to be incorporated. Instead of that, you might as well, tolerate the 2.5 days excess time and go ahead and, test it with the existing team. So the first solution does not add up in most cases. The second one, reduce the amount of testing, or how do we, as Manish says, we have to perform testing in an efficient manner to save time. True, that is very good in theory, but how? So think about that. While we are explaining point number 2, if you can think about a way that we can optimize the process, I would like to hear it really. So the next second thing is you can reduce the amount of testing. So that means you can reduce the amount of regression that you're doing, and that is always a risky situation for the company basically. So what if you haven't analyzed the extent of regression correctly? So the safest possible thing that you can do for your application is you can test it everything every time and make sure it is 100% consistent. So while you're not doing that, there is a certain level of risk involved. So there's always this situation that either you will have to increase the testers, which as we talked about is counterproductive. If we reduce the amount of testing, there is a real danger of running into unforeseen problems. So since these two are not the solutions, usually automation tool is used for regression. So every single time if you can automate and run these test cases using an automation tool, it's going to be a real value add in terms of, so at that point of time you can just concentrate on testing the new requirements. The older requirements can be automation tested. Now are you wondering, if I'm doing automation testing, why am I doing for the 100 old ones? Why am I not doing for everything starting from release 1? So I might be saving time from the beginning itself. So are you thinking that way? Anybody? So Sandhya says no, Padma says yes. So there's a mixed opinion here. So my question is, Tina, I'm saying that you can do regression testing with automation, right? So I'm asking, why only regression testing? Why not perform automation testing from the beginning itself? This 100 test cases, if I do it in automation testing, maybe I'll reduce the number of testing days to 3 itself. So why am I not taking off automation completely? I mean manual testing completely, and why am I not bringing automation from the beginning itself? Do you think that's a possible situation? Not having any manual testing and automation from the beginning? That's actually, not the right solution. The reason, we'll see. So this is the problem that automation tries to solve. When the amount of regression becomes out of hand, that there is a real imbalance between the number of testing days and the number of development days. This is the kind of situation that automation tries to solve, because there is no saying that the application development will stop at version 3. What if there's a version 10? What if there's a version 100? And there is going to be one. So what happens when things go so out of hand that you cannot do things manually? So it is in those cases automation testing can be a good candidate. So usually automation testing is considered for regression testing. So we'll see why, we'll see how it's done, we'll see all of those details. So the tool that we are going to see, as I said, is QTP. So a little bit of information on QTP. QTP stands for Quick Test Professional. However, this is an older name. This name is no longer used. But the reason why I've used the same name in my presentation is because I'm using an older version to show you. So since I'm using QTP, I would rather call it QTP. But the newest version, that is 12 and above, this is called HP UFT. So HP is the company that builds this automation software. UFT stands for Unified Functional Test. So QTP was a functional testing tool alone. So this used to perform only functional testing based on the user interface. But UFT, based on the new changes that have been added, UFT can do both functional, that is, GUI testing, plus it can also do web service testing. And UFT can also help us create or simulate mobile testing interfaces. So it is for both web applications, Windows applications, and mobile applications, the UFT. So this is a much better version, a new version. So initially for testing web services, HP used to have a tool called HP service. So HP service plus QTP is been integrated to form UFT. In addition to that, there is a new mobile testing facility that is incorporated into QTP. QTP uses Visual Basic Scripting, VB scripting, as its programming language. Now, is everybody clear about why we need to know programming language if we are using automation? Right. So I'll explain why. See, the normal testing process, when you're doing it manually, what do? We create test cases, instructions on how to test it. And these test cases is for a tester. Now, it doesn't matter if this tester is the person who is the author of the test cases, or in some cases they may not be. Some newcomer coming in will share your work. So the test case that you have written might be executed by somebody who probably has not seen your test case before. So test cases are your instructions. So basically a tester will pick up your test case and apply them on AUT, and then when the output is there, he will compare the expected result with the output that you got and determine the status of the test case, pass or fail or anything else. But when you are doing this through an automation based setup, this tester will use an automation testing software to actually interact directly with your AUT. So this is a software, the AUT is a software system. The automation testing tool is also a software system. So when two software systems are talking without an intervention of a human being, then you need to write your test cases. There are still test cases here, so the instructions are always there. But these instructions should be in a way that this machine understands. So clearly these instructions happen in the form of a programming language. And that is why when you're performing automation testing, you write your test cases in a programming language based medium. So that's why all automation tools use one or the other programming languages in order to create your test cases. So QTP uses VB scripting. Selenium uses Java. Selenium, actually if you use the Selenium IDE version, it supports multiple programming languages, but if you are using the advanced Selenium version, which is WebDriver, it uses Java to function. So this is why automation testing is considered a little more technical and an advanced topic, because it is technical in nature. It is really very technical in nature. So yeah, but that is the reason why we have the we need to know a programming language in order to be able to function as automation testers. So back to QTP, HP UFT is the current version. This uses VB scripting. You will only be able to install UFT on a Windows-based machine. So you will not be able to install it on any other computers that have any other operating systems. It's got to be a Windows-based computer. You can use UFT to test Windows or standalone applications, or you can also test mobile applications, as I was saying earlier. And it is a commercial software. It is not free to use. There are two kinds of licenses available to it: seat and concurrent license. Seat license is, one person license, one computer. Concurrent licenses, they provide you 10 licenses within a company at a particular point of time. 10 people can access it, anybody, any system, that sort of a thing. However, so this is a license tool, as I was saying, and also this is one of the expensive tools in the market. Now, even though QTP is an expensive tool, it still continues to be very popular because it is really, really robust. I mean, of course, you will have to get the right add-ons, but if you have the right add-ons, I'm yet to come across a software that QTP cannot test. It's really very strong. It's really well built. The support is also awesome, but however, it is a commercial software. There is a free trial, 60-day free trial, if I'm not wrong, available on the HP site. It is just a matter of downloading and installation. It is very simple. You can install it. I mean, the download takes about 1 or 2 hours depending on your internet connection. But once the download happens, all you have to do is just unzip the whole file and go to the setup.exe, and you just have to follow the instruction that it shows you, the installation wizard. At the end of it, you will be able to use HP UFT. I think it's a 60-day trial. I'm not sure. It might be 30 days also. So check it out on the HP, site. It is freely available, and the installation is actually easy. You don't need to do anything too technical. So I would really recommend giving it a try. Anything else about UFT? I'm trying to think. Also, this is object-oriented, so I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. And as I was saying, QTP is actually quite famous in the market, even though there are all kinds of issues, like it is expensive. There's a lot of installation. So when you install QTP, you will notice it. When you do, you will have to install the Microsoft C++ and the whole set of supporting software systems, which can be quite heavy on your system. So despite all these negative things, QTP is very famous in the market because it is really, really very robust. So yeah, this is a little bit of an introduction. So I'll show you one automation test to begin with. Then we'll talk about, how automation is done, why is it done only for regression and all that. So as I was telling you, I have an older version of QTP, but you know what? The way it behaves is pretty much the same. So you will find the exact same options in UFT also. So Tina says, is Selenium another kind of, yes, Selenium is also another automation testing tool. Now these are functional testing tools. So that's something that we'll have to keep in mind. So when I start QTP, by default, I have these 3 add-ons available. So add-ons are nothing but, the respective software functions that you will need to test specific sort of applications. For example, if I was testing an Oracle app, I will need the Oracle add-in. So if I'm testing, terminal emulator or a mainframe screen, I will need the terminal emulator add-in. So depending on the target application that I'm testing, if there are any specialized elements on it, technical elements on it that you want QTP to recognize, you will have to buy that add-in. So QTP comes by default with these three add-ins: the ActiveX, Visual Basic, and Web. For us to test normal, web applications and any of the Windows-based applications, these 3 add-ins are sufficient, but these are the default add-ins. You will have to get the other ones based on what you need is. So once you load this, this is going to take just a little bit. So this is what your QTP looks like, even UFT actually. So if you want to read more about what your version is, what it can do, take a look at the what's new section. And help files, again, download the help file. And this one, actually, the help tutorial, it also includes the VB scripting tutorial. So this is like a one-shot place where you can learn both the programming language and the tool. So I would really, really recommend you keeping a copy of the help files. And again, as I think I told you this already, I self-learned QTP, and I believe that anybody can too. And the approach that I followed was, I just went through every menu option. Of course, file and edit, view, these are, kind of simple. I mean, like how you would see in like a normal Word document or Excel. So these are more generic functions. But then, try and work your way through insert menu option, see, everything that's there. If anything is like, like right now, call to new action is grayed out. So try and understand why it's grayed out, and how you can access it, when will it get active, and if it does get active, what does it do. So work your way through each of the menu options, and by the time you get to help, I bet you'll be done with everything that you need to know about this software. So that's a personal tip from my end. That's how you can really learn any software without any external help. But anyways, so let's create a new test. So basically, we will have to try and understand where automation comes and plays a role in terms of the entire testing process, because that can be really confusing, because there are times where I've seen participants who expect that that you will write your test cases in Excel sheets and QTP will pick your instructions from the Excel and will execute it. So none of that is really true. So I want to take a minute and explain you the scope of where automation comes in and what it can do and all that. But before that, Manisha's question is QTP customized for each company? No. QTP, there is nothing to customize in there, so it is as it is. The software is just the same for every company. However, as I was telling you, depending on the target application that you're testing, you might have to get some add-ins, especially. But then, as far as you and I are concerned, when we are trying out the software, the 3 add-ons I showed you earlier, they are good enough to get started. So you don't have to do any other customization apart from that. And no, companies also don't do any customizing on QTP. So in the test case writing process, so there's test planning. So I'm giving you an overview of STLC and trying to give you an idea of where automation actually fits in. So the test plan, this activity is as is. Whether it is automation or manual testing project, you will still create a test plan. You will include a test strategy. You'll kind of, identify what to test, how to test, when to test. So the test strategy will answer the question of how to perform automation testing. And in the case of automation testing, the test strategy is sometimes called the framework. So I'll talk about what framework is and all that going forward. But as far as the test plan as an activity is concerned, the inclusion of tool does not make any difference, except that you will write your strategy that is more related to automation. But the activity itself, the usage of Word documents, the way teams collaborate, all of that remains the same. So when you move on to test design, so in the test design process, we create test scenarios and test cases. So this we will normally do it in Excel sheets. So usually for an automation testing project, the manual test cases are an input. So never ever think that there will not be any manual test cases. You would go and straight away write your automation test. That is never going to happen, and I'll show you why. So your manual test cases are your input. So in the test design phase, the test case writing, Excel sheets, all of that is going to be the same. But in addition to that, you will create your test scripts, or your code to actually, if you're using QTP, you'll create your test script in VB scripting. And this will be your automation test case. That will be the exact thing that you will normally do using a manual test case. So if you have a login functionality in your manual test case, the same test script will have the exact same functionality. The only difference will be in a manual test case, you will write it in English. In a test script, you will write it in a VB scripting language. And next, moving to test execution. In that point of time, you will only execute it through the automation software. So this is how automation will change the software testing lifecycle slightly, but not completely. Slightly, it's going to change it, and these are the areas that get affected. Any questions? Are you all with me so far, team? Okay, so now let's move to how do we create a new test at, let's actually create a test case. And as I was telling you, the input for an automation test case is a manual test case. So let's create a manual test case. So we have a test case ID. So So these are our columns. Let's say this is a login test case. The intention of the test is to precondition is the application has to be launched, and the data is available, the login data is available. And the test steps 1, enter the login ID, and you'll give the corresponding test data. Enter the password and the corresponding test data. Click OK or sign in or whatever, and the expected result is that the user is signed in. And once the user is signed in, some other post conditions. So let me use the application called Flights that comes with QTP as a sample. There it is. So we will use this because with web applications sometimes what happens is QTP does not support Chrome actually. So we'll have to use an older version which is Internet Explorer, and I have a lot of problems with Internet Explorer most of the times. So that's why I'm going to use a Windows-based application. And this is like a flight reservation application. The agent name is, I think you can give any name, but password I think is Mercury. And when you click OK, it will log you in, and here you can actually make the reservations. You can choose the date of the flight, you can fly from, fly to, and all that. So the user gets signed in at this point of time, and the post condition is that the flight reservation screen is displayed. So after you log in, you'll be able to see the flight reservation screen. So this is the functionality for which we have written an initial test case. So one thing that you will have to always remember when you're translating a manual test case into an automation test case is that there should not be no data loss. So that means if you have written these an X number of steps, or X amount of content in your manual test case, you have to make sure that all of this data makes its way into an automation test case. Because let's say there are 3 steps in my test case. If I create an automation test case that only satisfies 2 steps, it's not complete, isn't it? So always remember that when you are creating your automation test case, there should not be any data loss. Now let's go ahead and try and create a automation test case. Now one of the primary ways in which you can create a test inside QTP is through a mechanism called record and playback. So record and playback, what this means in simple terms is when you perform an operation on your AUT, you can instruct the QTP to learn it or to record the steps that you've performed, and then it will play them back. So while it plays the steps back, you can actually customize it and make it perform the steps you actually want it to. Again, at this point of time when I say it theoretically, maybe it will not make a lot of sense, but I'll show it to you practically. So first things first, we know that we have to create a test now, a test case, correct? So what I'll do is I'll just choose new test. So I'll have a brand new test open for me, and you see there is an option to record. So when I hit on record, it is asking me for record and run settings. So I have to choose what kind of application I'm going to record my steps on. Is it a web-based application or is it a Windows-based application? So if I installed a Java add-on or an Oracle add-on or a terminal emulator add-on, I will see many more tabs in the record and run settings window. But otherwise, I'll only see, right now I can only test Windows and web applications. So that is why I can set my settings on these 2 kinds of applications. So when you're looking at this, the test case ID and test case description, these are 2 things that you can include in your test case this way. So what you can do is you can save this test, and while you're saving it, you can give an appropriate name. So if this is TC underscore login 01, and if this is about login with valid info, so this is how you can incorporate. Okay, let's create it on the desktop. So the appropriate name TC underscore login 01, and this is for login with valid info. So these two of the columns you can incorporate in the name. Now the next thing is the precondition. So why are we using the precondition field? We are actually trying to set the state of the application. Where does the test begin? How should the application be? In what page should it be? What state should it be? So that's what we are setting with the precondition column. The same thing is true. The same thing you're accomplishing through the record and run settings. So for all intents and purposes, you can say that the precondition is equal to the record and run settings. So right now I'm going to choose the application that I want my site to open. So this is flights application. You can actually browse to any other app that you want your QTP script to open every time it runs. So I'm just going to choose it. So this is my flights app. And when I say OK, remember that my QTP screen becomes smaller. And please note the blinking recording option right now, right there on the bottom of my screen. And right now, what it does is it opens the application for me and gives me an option to perform whatever operation that I want to on my AUT. So right now, I'm going to set the username. So please note that as and when I'm working on the app on my application, the equivalent VB script steps are getting created in my QTP UI. So I'll do this one more time. So please note this. As soon as I'm done entering the password, and when I click on OK, see the corresponding steps where I'm entering the password and where I'm clicking on OK, all that is happening. So yes, Manish, it is creating a test script for me while actually giving me an opportunity to open the application and recording. So this is a step that is similar to test case creation or test design step. That is the second phase in the STLC. So right now my test is done, correct? So go back to your manual test case and see what are the steps. You're entering the ID, entering the password, and you're clicking on OK. So the same thing is happening here. You're entering the username, you're entering the password, and you're clicking on OK. So basically you've got all the steps that you need for your test case. So when you're satisfied with the steps that you have, go ahead and stop the recording. So this is activate because I kind of went away from the script, went away from my window and all that. It has added a new step for me. So just because QTP has created the script for me, it does not mean that I have to use it as is every single time. If I don't want to use this particular step, I can always remove it. So if I don't want to hit on tab after I set my name, set the username, I can remove it. So QTP will create an initial basic test case for me, and I have an option to edit it in any way I see fit. So this is the record mechanism is one of the most commonly used mechanism in order to create or document your tests. So now that I have created my test, let's see what I can do with it. Okay, so far we are done with these two. We are done with the precondition setting. We are done with the test steps, and the steps include the data if you look. So what value am I setting? Swati. In the password, what value am I setting? QTP actually encrypts all passwords. So this is an encrypted password for whatever field I have entered while I'm recording. So this is a security measure that QTP provides. So anyways, I have entered password as well. So the data field is also incorporated already. All that is left is for us to check the expected and the actual result. So when will we get whether or not the actual result and expected result are the same? When we execute the test case. So right now the test case creation process is done, and right now I'll show you how to execute this test case. So to execute the test case, all you have to do is simply run. This run option is also called a playback. So please note what's happening. So when I hit on run, it is asking me where it can store the test results. Just choose any location, it's up to you. No restrictions on that. And then when you click OK, Please note the running option blinking on my screen, team. So you see, the test started to run at 1841 36 seconds, and it was done at 1841 39 seconds. So it's not even a, it doesn't, it takes 3 seconds to actually run a test. So it's really, really fast. But what I want you to note here is the status. The status of this test case is done. Now, in our valid test case, statuses, is done one of them? What do you think, team? Do we have done in any of the valid statuses? No. So, right now, this test says done because this is simply entering data and clicking on something. So this is actually acting as a proxy. So if I'm lazy enough, this is just doing those activities for me. But is it checking whether or not the actual result and expected result are the same? No. And when any test is not performing that validation, it's not a test at all. It is simply repeating of the few steps that you have instructed it to repeat. So that is why it has repeated it. It has done what it's supposed to do. That is why the status of the test is done. And done is never a valid status. You should always aim to get either passed or failed, or are there warnings, whatever. So always aim for a valid status. Now, how do we do that? How do we aim for a valid status? See, one thing that you need to do in automation is, here it says the user is signed in, right? Expected result. So if you were testing, after you clicked OK, you came here, you know that you were signed in, correct? So, but then do you think QTP knows inherently that, the screen came, so it means signed in? No, you have to instruct it to look for that screen, and when that screen has come up, you have to instruct it to either say that it has passed or failed. So it will basically interpret your thought process based on the script that you write. So it does not have any intuitive skills really. So with automation, it is not just important for you to write the write the series of steps, but you'll have to actually instruct how to perform that checkpoint or that validation point in your test. Now, QTP inbuilt provides you with few of the checkpoints. Like there are lots of checkpoints that QTP provides. So you can place a checkpoint on any standard object, specifically on a text area, bitmap, databases, accessibility checkpoint, XML checkpoint. So all of these are inbuilt checkpoints that are available. So unless your test has at least one checkpoint, then your test is not complete. Your test is not actually a test. It will simply be a repetition of what you're doing. So what we can do is, you can insert a checkpoint either while recording, or there is something called the active screen. So every time a certain operation has been performed on the application, the active screen will create a instance of this screenshot of what action was done on what object. So you see, setting of the password, let me show that to you in a better way. So when I was entering the password, it will show me that this is the field that I was acting on. So when I clicked OK, this is the screen that I'm acting on. So if I need to place a checkpoint on this, all I have to do is I can just go here and say insert checkpoint. So I can insert it from a active screen. Or if I don't want to do that, what I can do is I can record it one more time. And while the recording is happening, I can insert a standard checkpoint and say that if this flight reservation screen is present, I can say that, so this screen with all these properties, if it is present, then my test would pass. So I'll stop it right here. And then I will run this time. So please note that it is running right now, and I'm not performing these steps. QTP is doing this for me. So you see, the test result now says that it is passed. So there's another thing that I want to show you really quickly. So right now, let's assume that this is the first time I'm running this test. So this is test run 1, okay? So I'm running this test run 1. Great, my test passed. So when my test has passed, all I'm doing is I'm closing the test results. I'm not closing the flight reservation screen at all. I'm leaving it as is, and I'm running this test another time. Now watch what happens. The application is stuck in its step 1. It is trying to find something. Eventually it's going to give up. So let's wait while it does that. So it is not able to find the login button right now. Now, why is that happening, team? Why do you think the test failed the second time? Because it's the same test. So nothing has changed except that I haven't closed the flights window. It's because with automation, it is very important that you set the application back to the state that it began in. See, right now the flight application is open and it is looking for the login window, but it does not find any. So if you need to run a test more than once without manual and always remember, when you're writing an automation test case, minimize the manual intervention. So some people will argue, what's wrong if I just enter the username, password, click OK, and the rest of the interpretation I'll do it, whether or not the user has logged in or not. That will be something I will decide, even if the test case status is done. I don't care, is what some people argue on that. But the point is, with automation, you will have to reduce the manual intervention to as much of an extent as you possibly can. A lot of times when you create test cases, they are not going to be run one at a time. Usually they are created as batches and the entire batch runs. And when even one failure happens in the test case, then the entire batch stops. Then there is really no value add of actually bringing in automation when you're trying to do it manually. So um, always make sure that the manual intervention is as minimum as possible. So at this point of time, what I would do is I would insert a step to actually close my flights application window every time that this test runs. So I mean, I know most of you must be thinking, do I need to know VB scripting in order to able to learn automation? How proficient should I be? So first thing is, I haven't created even one single letter of code so far. All of this is something that QTP has automatically generated for me. Right now I have to insert a step that will close the flight reservation window every time as a last step every time this test runs. So what QTP does is it has an option called step generator. So what I can do here is I can choose the window. So all the objects that are present that will be displayed here, I'll take the object that I would like to work on. I'll take the flight reservation screen, and then I will close this every time. So I can choose the object on which I want to act, and then I'll choose the operation that I want to perform, and I'll click this. So you see, automatically a line of code gets inserted. So I'm not saying that you don't need to know automation. I mean, you don't need to know programming language. I won't say that. See, if you're planning to live in a foreign country, it helps that you learn the language. Definitely, yes. But on the other hand, you cannot say that, without the language I won't even go to the other country. So these are things that you can learn in parallel. You can learn QTP and the programming language in parallel. What is more important in my opinion is knowing the application very well, knowing how to test the application very well, and being able to translate that into a logical sequence is much more important. Now if I did not want to use the step generator, what I can really do is I can start typing in the QTP interface. So when I start typing window, the only window object is available is flight reservation. So it will directly insert that window name. And when I click on dot, it will show me all the functions that are available. So these three features, like this interface, the record and playback, the step generator, and when you type in the editor, it will show you the suggestions. So these three features are built specifically to make sure that testers, whether or not they're proficient in VB scripting or not, they will be able to use this software very, very seamlessly. So don't be intimidated by the script. Don't be intimidated by the programming language. Definitely, definitely give it a try. I really recommend it. Even though, see, not everybody has to be automation testers. I say this a lot, but that doesn't mean that you can shut yourself off to a major innovative stream of your career and say that no, I chose to be a manual tester, so I'm not going to listen to even automation testing. So that's not the right approach. So get a feel of it, get a taste of it, explore it. When all else fails, you just don't like it, don't be in it. But then at least try to learn it enough so that you understand the context when people are talking about automation testing. So again, back to the tool. Now this time let's run this test twice. So this is the first test run. It has inserted my name and password, and it has tested it, and it says passed. Good. Second test run. Perfect. So no matter how many times you execute now, it will still run and there will not be any issues. So always remember that at the end of an automation test, you will have to include steps. You will have to do you will have to include steps to actually close or return the application to the state in which this test began in. So that's the thing. And also one more thing, team. If sometimes participants will ask me, especially this is true in automation classes, they'll ask me, do we have to use the record and run settings for preconditions? Do I have to use the checkpoint to include the validation point? The answer is no. You can actually do it programmatically. If I can write a if statement, if window flight reservation dot exists, so if I just send it to a variable, so I'm trying to show you how you can write the the checkpoint statement. So you can comment the statement, which means it will not get executed. So if x is equal to 1, then you can say message box login is successful. So let's run this and see what happens. In this case, so when you write your own, when you write your own checkpoints, probably the test results will still show done. There is a way to actually write, into the test results. So report dot reporter dot report, was it? Yeah. I have a feeling the reporter statement will fail, but let's see. Just give me a few minutes, team. I want to really give you a feel of real-time automation. True. Okay. I knew it. Please bear with me. So what we are doing here is we are checking if the flight reservation window exists. So if it exists, I'm just, reading that value into a variable X, and I'm just printing that, variable X with the help of a message box to see what value it takes. And then inside the if statement, if X is equal to true, which means the flight reservation window exists, it is again showing me a login is successful window. So right now you can stop it. You can see that the login is successful, which is, the end of the test. But if you want to write it into the report, the test results as a pass event, that is what I'm trying to do. So you see, I think this is a little bit of problem with. It's a problem with the syntax actually. If I can just go back and check it in my blog, I can find it, but looks like. But anyways, you can use the reporter.report event, and you know what? If you really need help, all you have to do is put your cursor at the point where you need help and just do an F1, and the help will be right here, and this is a great way to learn what you're doing. So if you do it as 0, okay, one last time we'll try it. If it does not work, we'll just, abandon this and go to the next one. No, yeah, I'm doing something wrong with the syntax. See, this is how I'm supposed to write this. 1 comma custom step. Let's take this statement and change it. So we need the status to pass, which is 0, and you can write user defined checkpoint, and this is the last trial, not trying again. So hopefully if this time it should work. There we go. So you see, now the result says passed. So you don't have to use the checkpoints that QTP provides you inbuilt. You can write your own programmatic code. Same thing is true for preconditions also. You don't have to use the record and run settings. You can actually write statements to invoke the code by yourself. And then there was another question, can we run the code from any step, or just for one step or whatever? Yes, you can do all that using the debug option. So you can run from one step, you can place breakpoints and all that, that's possible. But this is the basic test creation process. As you can see, something as simple as login. So here's what I'll tell you. Do a comparison between how much time it took us to write a manual test case for login and how long it took us to write a perfectly working automation test case for login team. Which one's more? Sandhya, do you think it took us longer to write a manual test case? No, yeah, it took us so long to actually write an automation test case, with the validation points and everything incorporated, isn't it? Think about what if the functionality was a little more critical? What if, we had to use something that had to look at 2 or 3 screens, and then we had to decide whether or not it is a pass or fail or whatever that is. So in that case, usually automation test cases, creating the automation script, writing the automation test script in an automation tool is actually very, very time consuming. The real value that automation will add is in execution. See, when I'm executing this test case with that many steps that I have, with 2 message points, with 2 manual intervention points also, it took about 8 seconds here. So you see, 8 seconds were, so if you were to execute this test case manually, that's going to take us a lot longer. So execution wise, automation tests, they run very fast, but creation wise, automation tests take a lot of time to create. If you really want to write a robust test case with as little manual intervention as possible, it's going to take you a lot of time to get it right. A lot of debugging is involved as well. So I'll take some questions. I see that there are many I haven't executed. I mean, there are many that I haven't answered. So we do not need to write test scripts in automation testing. No, we do have to write test scripts, but there is help available. That's all I'm saying. So can you execute only one line? Absolutely yes. Each tool, does it have its own language? Yes. What does it do differently during the second run? No, it just repeats the test. It's just, running the test one more time is all. And the second time it was failing initially because it was just looking at getting another screen. So what is the purpose of keeping it running multiple times? That's a good question. So let's say I'm testing 10 people's login IDs, all valid. I want to see whether or not they're working. So at that point of time, I have to run this test 10 times with different data values. So what you can do in QTP when you have different data values is either you can run it on one constant value, or you can actually, so what you can do is here in the values thing. So I'll come to that in a little bit. I'll explain that. Auto test case can be used over and over again. Yes. Yes, designing is slower, but execution is faster. That's correct. If it is a big or complicated test case, which is a better option, manual or automation? So it's not about the choice really. So when you decide to go into the automation route, it's because you want to remove the manual intervention. So if you have like a testing that is done halfway by manual testers, halfway automation testers, that's not really a good situation. So if you're doing all regression via automation, everything has to be automated. Okay. So can we run these test scripts in multiple iterations? Yes, you can. I'll show you how. So that's why automation is better for repeated testing like regression, where you need to run again and again already designed, right? Yes, that's a great observation. So when you write your automation test cases once, you can rerun them again and again. So if you're taking like 5 days to run all your manual test cases, the chances are automation will do it overnight. And in fact, with automation testing, you can test 24/7, because in my previous project, I used to work for Bank of America at a point of time, and there they had these mainframe screens for which we wrote lots of automation scripts. So as I told you, we used to create a batch, and then we used to just initiate the running of the batch before we left work on a particular day. We just used to hit run, and the next morning when we used to come back to work, we used to have all the results done ready for us to interpret and see which tests ran and which did not. So basically you can utilize 24 hours in a day. There is no need for a person to be there in the office and to babysit. But then again, it's not something that you get to in a day or two. Automation is a long-term commitment. It takes a lot of time for you to write scripts that don't need people to look in on them from time to time. So it is a lot of investment. So we'll talk about all of that in a little bit. But before that, let me give you a little bit of an overview of QTP tool itself, and then we'll talk about iterations, data. We'll also talk about the challenges and all that. Okay. So as I was showing you earlier, when I was creating my script, I was showing you this screen, correct? Now you don't always have to create your tests in this view. There are two views available to QTP. One is the expert view and the other is the keyword view. I'm more comfortable with the expert view because I don't know, I would rather not deal with all of these tables and everything. But for beginners, it is recommended that you use the expert view because it does not have a lot of programming involved in it. I mean, that's the recommended, as I'm saying again, but I kind of find this one to be much easier to interpret, but then it's a personal choice. You have two options to look at which view you want to see. Both of them are exactly similar to each other. And if, for example, I place my cursor on step 3 here and move to the keyword view, exactly the third step will get highlighted for me. So here, all the information, all the actions that you've performed on the application, they are simply recorded in the form of a tabular format. So here it is showing you what item this work started on, what operation was performed, what is the value that it took, and here it will give you an English-like translation of what the action has been. So it will tell you enter Swati in the agent name edit box. So this is a way for you to double check. So if your documentation step and your test case step are are synchronous with each other, then you can say that you've written a correspondingly correct automation test step. So this is one view, this is another view, and as you can see on the top, there is something called the action. Now the thing is, in QTP you can keep your code modular. You can actually keep your code in sections by using actions. So in QTP there is at least one action for every test, so you can have more than one actions in a particular test. So this is just to make sure that you sectionalize, or you compartmentalize your code into respective modules. Now another thing about QTP, as I was telling you, it is object oriented. Now what does that mean? See, right now on my screen, on the application screen, the first the first field that I entered is the login field. The second field that I entered is password field. Now, do you think, team, it will make any difference to the code if I enter the password first? Do you think that my script will fail? What do you think? Okay, Sandhya thinks it fails. So let's see what happens. No worries. I mean, I'm glad you spoke your mind. The script does not fail. The reason why the script does not fail is QTP does not care the order in which, the elements exist on the screen. So for example, in the future, if a particular, window moves to, let's say if this image, it comes to this side of the screen and these two move to that side of, or if they cancel, okay, and if they become the header and the others become the footer, QTP does not have, it does not make any difference to QTP. The reason is QTP does not remember the objects. See, while we were recording, QTP recorded these objects. It remembered, which object to act on. So next time we run it, QTP remembers where to set the data Swati. And how does it remember that? It does not remember it based on the order, or let's say, for example, instead of opening this screen opening here, if it opens on the top corner of my window, QTP still does not matter. If I change the screen resolution to a certain different thing, it does not matter. It does not matter because QTP right now, the recording mode in which I've recorded this is the normal recording mode. And in the normal recording mode, QTP remembers object based on their definitions. And these definitions are actually things that are set by your developers. So all the object definitions while the recording is happening are stored in what is called the object repository. So here you see in the object repository, and it also follows a hierarchical structure. So flight reservation might also have an OK button, but the way it differentiates between the OK button in the flight reservation screen and the OK button is the login screen is by associating it to a parent. So QTP has this hierarchical section, because of which you will be easily able to identify which one's the parent and which one's not. And while the recording is happening, QTP keeps a copy of the properties of these objects, and these are the properties that are programmatically set, as I said, by the developers. So the native class, all of these activities. So if you feel like these properties are not enough to identify this object uniquely, you can go ahead and add the other properties that might help it to identify it. So QTP stores these object definitions. So QTP has 3 levels of storage in my opinion. One is the code, the other is the objects, and the third thing is the data. I'll show you how data and all that. Another neat feature when it comes to objects is the object spy. So what object spy does is, early on I was talking about including a checkpoint, isn't it? So if I want to include the checkpoint manually, if I don't know what kind of object the window flight reservation is, so in that case what I can do is I can use this object spy, and when I click on this pointy whatever hand, and then I go to the any object that I want to learn about, it will show me the properties of that object so I understand it better and I can use it in my program in a better way. So Object Spy is a very, very nifty tool, something that, if you are into automation testing, this is something that you'll use very, very often. So that is about actions, that is about, objects, and step generator is an important feature, and Object Spy, which brings us to the data now. So it is never a good idea, it's never a good practice to actually, hard code your data into your programs. See, I know if anybody is a developer here, you will tell me this, but it is never a good idea to actually say that, your code will only work for one set of values. You should always make it in a way, you should always parameterize it so it can pick up value from an external data source. So same thing you can do, as I was giving you the other example. What if I have to check the login IDs of 10 people and see, if all of them are able to log in or not? So in that case, if I have to test 10 people, I shouldn't have to write 10 programs, correct? Just because the data value is changing. So the way you can parameterize it using QTP is, now this is the easiest way I can parameterize using QTP from the keyword view actually. You can come to the value tab, click on that little button that comes up when you're accessing that. I'll show that to you one more time. You can either choose to insert a constant into that, or you can choose to parameterize it. So every program comes with its own data table. So there are two kinds of data tables. One is the global and one is the per action. So if it is a global data table, it is accessible by all actions. If it is, if it is a data table pertaining to that particular action, only that action will be able to take care of it. So you can choose which sheet you want to use. And when you say OK, you see the code has changed here. It is going to pick up from the data table, this column from the data table and this particular sheet. So similarly, you can do it with the password field also. Since this is an encoded field, what I like to do is, for the next one onwards, I have to provide encrypted data. So I just want to remove that and just place normal data. So the next time, so I can give as many values as I want to, and then I can run this test for all of these values in the data table. So you can set how many times this needs to run with the help of settings and the run settings. So you can choose to run this program for only one iteration on all rows, from one row to another row and things like that. So when you are running it for multiple rows, it is very important to make sure that you have the right state of the application before the next row runs. See, otherwise it will run only for the first one. For the next one it will not run if the state has not gone back to the beginning. So this is called the parameterization. So there are three elements of content when it comes to an automation code. One is the code, the lines of code, the other is the objects, and the third thing is the data. So in an automation project, you can really make the most of it, or you can create a really good framework when you exploit these three elements. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but before that I want to show you that there are other recording modes as well. So right now we are recording in the normal recording mode, which means it will remember the objects at an object level and not worry about the screen resolution or anything else. But for sometimes, see, as I was telling you, you need to get the right add-ins to test the right kind of applications. But sometimes when you don't have the right add-ins, but you still want to test the application, what do? This is actually a practical scenario that happened to me. We were testing an application which is reflects Unix screens. QTP would not recognize the Unix screen at all. It wouldn't see for example, right now in this screen it knows that this is a text box, this is a button, this is these are objects that QTP knows, but on the Unix screen QTP did not know any objects. If this was the entire screen, it would treat this whole window as a window itself, and all of these inbuilt things QTP did not recognize them at all. And we had to get in a license which was expensive, and it was the UAT, so we had to come up with a workaround. So in that situation, what you can do is you can move to a different kind of a recording mechanism. You can choose to either go for an analog or low level recording. So if you go for an analog recording, it will remember where you clicked. Say for example, I'm clicking on this particular icon. So it will remember where I'm clicking with respect to my screen coordinates. So it doesn't matter whether or not, see right now, if this window comes up, if QTP recognizes this OK button as a button, great. But if it is not recognizing it, all I need for the test to work the next time is that it clicks right here, correct? So when I do an analog recording, it will remember the exact screen coordinates where the clicking has happened, where the data entry has happened and all that. So sometimes, you might have to use the other recording mechanisms. And there's another recording mechanism called low-level recording. And when you use the low-level recording, it will remember every movement of the mouse and everything that you do. So these are the other workarounds that are available when you're trying to work with a non-conventional or unconventional sort of a system. So any questions? Can you check with numeric value in login? Yes, I mean, you just have to write the correct, see, if login is, this is a test for valid login. But if you are writing a test for invalid login, you will have to find that exact situation that happens. So let me show you. So in the flight application, see if I provide like, so I provide a username, agent name, and if I provide incorrect password and I say okay, the incorrect password screen is coming up. So I have to write this code and look for the flight reservation incorrect password error message and then write my negative test case. So negative test case testing is also possible, but I just have to write the code. See, and also it is very important to remember that at this point of time, just because it hasn't found the flight reservation screen, QTP does not immediately assume that the login ID and password were incorrect. So that kind of conclusion making it cannot do. So right now it will tell me that user ID and password did not match or the login is not successful, but it will not tell me that it is because of a certain reason the user ID and the test was not successful. So that kind of assumptions it will not make. So if you need QTP to perform negative testing, you will have to explicitly write code for that and let QTP learn what happens when a negative data is set in there. So it will do everything you need it to do, but the thing is you'll have to program it first. So the fact that QTP is object oriented, it does not mean that it can be used for automation testing, when you test software which was not developed. Yes, that's true. That is true. On the other hand, if a software was developed by using an object oriented language, need to refer to the objects used by developers in order to create your automation testing design? I would say yes. So that is why, see, again, coming back to our question, why can't we not use automation for the first release itself? Why are we using it only for regression? The reason is, as you can see, automation testing mostly, of course there are other ways to do it, but most of the times you can perform automation testing only when the application is available. So for version 1, you cannot write scripts while the application is still being built. So that is not possible, because what if the developer changes the agent name, properties to a different thing, because, that's what suits the program. So you should have a stable application to work on it. So never will the new requirements will be automated in the first go. That is never going to happen, because when it is not even tested once, there is no saying that the application is stable. So the ones that are at least tested by manual testing one time, those become a good candidate for automation testing, because if you are building your scripts on an unstable environment, you're actually writing unstable code, which means you will have to go back and change it many times. And automation test scripting, as you've seen, is a complicated process. It's not easy. You're not going to get it right at the first go. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of strategizing and all that. So when you're talking about debugging or modifying an automation script, the same is true again. You're actually going back and meddling with a code, which again might introduce new errors. So never attempt automation testing for the first time. Only pick it up for the application that has already undergone at least one round of automation manual testing. Again, if it were up to me, I wouldn't even say one round. At least wait for 2 to 3 rounds of manual testing to be completely done, then go for automation testing. Otherwise, it is going to be a waste of a lot of effort. That is why automation is only recommended for regression, not exactly for the first go. So you're testing in GUI app. Can you test in web page too? Yes, absolutely. So do you have to manually enter data into QTP? So are you talking about this one, the data table? The thing is, either you can manually enter it from here, or you can connect a database where all this data exists. So the data input does not necessarily have to come from the data table. It can come from an external Excel sheet. It can come from a database. So all of these choices are there. So despite any version, the first time it will be manual testing. Yes, the first time it will always be manual testing. In fact, the first few times it will be manual testing. Okay, so again, let's try and answer the what, why, and how, all the question words about automation. One is, what is automation testing? So that I think I think I gave you at least a good enough idea about what automation testing is and all that. So far what we've seen is automation testing is where a tool actually creates the test cases and then executes them and produces the results. So it's actually a very fast forward way to testing that minimizes a human intervention in it so much. And then why is automation testing used? Because first of all, it brings a level of efficiency to save time, and for cases like this where there are multiple versions in the future, uh, you don't want to keep expanding the amount of testing. At the same time, you don't want to increase the number of testers, nor do you want to reduce the amount of testing. So in a case like that, automation testing is a great fit. How is automation testing done? We've seen that we need a tool, we need a programming expertise to a certain extent, we need our manual test cases. Based on that, we sit down, we create a framework. Again, I'm yet to discuss what framework is. I know we'll come to that. So we design a framework, and based on the framework we create our tests and plan automation. And when is automation done? At least after one cycle of manual testing is complete. And where is automation done? Automation is also something that is carried out in the QA environment. And who is it done by? That's also an important question. Usually if a particular team goes for an automation initiative, so I mean, what I was saying is, see, when you are, so I lost my train of thought. Just give me a minute. So who does automation testing? So when there is a new automation testing initiative that is started out by a company, usually the existing manual testing team are the first choice, because as you know, see, unless I know the application very well, I don't know what the checkpoint is. I will not understand how do I strategize my testing. So manual testing knowledge is very important for you to be successful as an automation tester. However, sometimes manual testers are not interested, or they might not be technically ready. So that is why usually companies have a separate manual automation testing team and a separate manual testing team. The manual testing team will be working on the current releases. The automation testing team will be working on regressing the previous releases. But this is not true always. Sometimes the same team will do both manual and automation testing. So that's why companies these days, if you look at any job description, there will be mention of automation. It does not mean that you're going to work exclusively on automation and there isn't going to be any manual testing. That's not true at all, because all companies, they anticipate future versions for their applications, correct? So when they are anticipating future versions of the application, they are anticipating a lot of regression testing. And a lot of regression testing means there's a scope for automation. So when that scope comes up, they want their team members to be ready with it. So again, I'm not discouraging you from automation or anything, but every role where I was hired to be an automation tester, I've done mostly manual testing, because automation is a really tough job, really. It takes a lot of commitment, it takes a lot of like-minded people for it to work. So even though most companies with all their good intentions, they want to include the automation initiative, it is more often than not that manual testing takes the forefront. Again, but then they do have this requirement that they want to hire somebody who knows automation testing. That's something we cannot get over. That's something that we will have to work and convince them that we can do. So that's why I say, don't shut yourself away from automation testing. Learn it enough so that you understand at least the context of conversation when automation testing is in picture. So yeah, there are other few things that we will have to wrap up. One is the ROI, return on investment, when it comes to automation projects and frameworks. So once that's done, I think our discussion on QTP will be done. I'll take Sandhya's question. QTP looks interesting, but I think there is this learning curve to master it. So I was wondering, is there any advantage of knowing QTP in a resume or salary basis if you're applying for a manual testing role? Is there any added benefit having it to better our chances? So as I was explaining you right now, all companies foresee a future, in terms of their applications going on repeated releases. So which means there's going to be a lot of regression, which means there is scope of automation. So they want to be prepared when they hire somebody new that these people will be easily, will easily fit into the automation role when it comes in. So that's why automation sometimes becomes a prerequisite. But then again, it's not a tough skill to acquire is what I want to tell you, seriously. You just have to, again, what I would say is learn the fundamentals very well, understand why automation is important, and also there is a lot of negativity when it comes to record and playback. Don't pay attention to that. See, how does it matter how you write a test? Whether you start by recording or whether you start by, creating all the code by typing it in, it doesn't really matter. Again, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to anybody. So record and playback is your best friend as long as, as long as you're practicing and trying to get a hang of the tool. So practice it. It's not that big a deal. First 1 or 2 times, probably you'll feel like, you're not finding your way around it. But it's an easy skill to acquire. Trust me, it gets better with time. And Manisha's question is, do companies develop automation testing side by side to manual testing to save time for future testing on software updates? No. So if your question is, while this testing of 100 test cases is happening, does the automation team create the 100 test cases in automation? No. This is not a good idea, because while even if these 100 test cases are not even tested once, there is no guarantee that these 100 test cases are written correctly. So when you are working with an incorrect input or unstable input, your automation scripts are also going to be unstable. And modifying manual scripts is just a matter of time. You'll just go there and type in a new thing. But for automation, that's not how it works. There are a lot of dependencies, a lot of debugging factors. So no, that's not done side by side. However, if the automation initiative is taken up, when this application comes in, the 50 new test cases will be, under manual testing team. In parallel, the 100 regression testing test cases, they will be automated. So at least first round of manual testing has to happen on automation for us to consider those test cases for automation. Okay, so let's come back to frameworks, what framework is and all that. See, as I was telling you, there are three components, three elements to software, automation software. So there's code, there's objects, there's data. And also, I wrote a login function, like it has 10 steps or something like that, correct? One piece of code. Now, every time I have to do a flight reservation, so in the flight reservation operation, I might actually reserve a flight, I might cancel, I might reschedule, I might choose like 2 flights, 2 tickets, or whatever it might be, different conditions that I want to check. Now, every time when I'm checking this, if I have to rewrite my steps for login, then it's going to defeat the purpose, because to initially write the login function once, it's difficult. To actually rewrite it over and over again, it is much more difficult. And assuming that this piece of code, reservation is tested by team member 1, cancellation is tested by team member 2, rescheduling is tested by team member 3, each one will have their own programming style, which means you will not have a common standard of code that you will use as a guideline for everyone. So this is a big challenge. See, you ask two people to solve a math problem, chances are they will use different formulae, they'll use different ways. Some might use a calculator, some might actually calculate it with their fingers, whatever it might be. There are different approaches to solve a particular problem. The same is true in automation as well. And then automation scripting takes time. So really the best way in which you can automate and minimize the time it takes for you to write all the code is to reuse all these components. So login will be created once and you will reuse it, or you will access this piece of code every time you are writing a code for login. So this way you just have one standard piece of working code, no changes made to it. That means every time you can say with a certain certainty that it will work. If it worked once, you can say it will work always. So code reusability, reusing objects. Again, login screen will have the same objects, no matter how many people are accessing it, how many times. So reuse the objects. Similarly, use the same piece of code for multiple sets of data like you're seeing here. So this is one way. So a lot of reusability components. So you see this action in QTP, if I create a new action, I have a choice whether or not I want this action to be reusable. And by default, all actions in QTP are reusable. So I can create this login action once. I can use it as many times as possible. But then you will have to strategize on how to reuse the code, object, and data. See, what if, login is person A's responsibility and this person decides to do it at the last? And while all the other functionality is dependent on login. This is not a right strategy to approach it, correct? So automation requires an enhanced level of planning. You will have to decide on what to reuse, in what order, who is going to be responsible for it, and all of that stuff. Where do you store this? What kind of naming convention you want to use? How do we normalize the process of code creation? So this is actually a whole entire ball game. So what is included? So if you are writing your, if you are creating your strategy for test scripting or test execution by focusing on code and reusing this code to the maximum extent, this kind of framework is called keyword driven framework. Because right now the login function will behave like a keyword. So login will become a keyword. Every time you say login, you're calling the function that you've written for login. Sorry, and you're using that as a keyword. So if you are writing your framework, excuse me team, please give me a second. Sorry about that. So if you're creating a framework by focusing on reusing the code, then that kind of a framework is called a keyword driven framework. However, if you're writing it focusing on reusing the data, that's called a data driven framework. In my opinion, really, in my practical experience, I don't think any one of these keywords work for one particular situation. So I'm not saying that these frameworks don't work, but I'm saying that one is never sufficient for us to, achieve a comprehensive result. So you will really have to club these two frameworks and use, what is relevant at what point of time. So usually the framework that is most used is called a hybrid framework, which is a combination of these two. There are a lot of advanced concepts in QTP like descriptive programming and all that. I don't want to go into that honestly because I don't believe in it. See, people tell me that you can write code even before the developer has built it because you can talk to them and understand what kind of object definition they are going to come up with, and then you can write your code. You don't have to use the object repository and all, which is great in theory. I think that if you can explore that area and if you want to achieve that level of I don't know, that level of complexity into your testing, more power to you. But I believe that when there is a convenient option available, why go through all that trouble? Because at the end of the day, your focus is really to automate and automate good. How you're doing it, it's none of your business. I mean, you don't really have to, talk to your developers. Again, I feel like all that dependency on an external team and all is going to cause more trouble than harmony. That's again a personal opinion about descriptive programming. I'm not a big fan. But then that's an advanced concept, and that's what automation testers mostly strive to achieve. But then I'm different. I beg to differ on that area. The other thing is the investment on automation projects. See, automation by rule is expensive because you have to bring in technical teams. So how I was telling you that there exists some automation team in parallel with the manual testing team. So you're looking at technical team formation. Again, when you form new teams, there's new infrastructure involved. And then when it comes to automation, it is time consuming when it comes to framework creation and the building of code. So both of these things, the test script building, all of that is going to take a lot of time. In addition to that, the tools have licenses. Then to manage these you will probably have to integrate with the test management software, which again has licenses. So you see, when you are looking at it, the investment part of automation is really high, really high. So if at all this application has only 3 versions, if I'm anticipating only 3 versions, I'm not looking at any future versions, then I might as well spend 10 days of testing time rather than investing money on all of these things. So because the return on investment on automation is not something that you can see immediately. However, if this application has like 100 cycles, if you're anticipating this application to be there forever, and you feel like every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks there's going to be a new release no matter what, this is a long-standing application and it needs certain amount of regression mandatorily, if that is the impression, then you can go for automation and you will not see the return on investment, ROI, the return on investment on automation. You will not see it very soon. In my projects, I feel like it took a year at least to see that the money that we were saving by reducing the testing cycles was actually worthwhile putting this much of investment. So automation teams is a long-time commitment. It's actually a big challenge to convince companies and managements to actually invest their money in automation. So that's why I feel like Selenium has a larger market these days, because irrespective of all of those other things, the licenses cost is minimum because Selenium is an open source software. So again, with Selenium, the only problem that I feel is it's still a work in progress kind of a product. So the way it works today is good enough, but you never know what kind of changes are going to come in that, whether it is for the good or not. So that's a thing that is still up for debate. But then yes, it is picking up popularity. It is becoming a major competitor for QTP and all that. But for an automation project, if you do get the chance to, again, automation is like the holy grail. Everybody wants to do automation because if we kind of feel like without automation, we kind of feel like our experience as QA testers falls flat, which is fine. I mean, if that's the opinion you have, which is good. However, don't be too eager to get onto the at least in a job. So when you're in a job and your client comes and asks you, what about automation, do you think it's a good idea? It's not really about whether or not you want to do automation or whether or not you can do automation. The real question is, can the client afford it? Again, I mean it in a very respectful manner because it's a lot of money. When the client is putting up that much of money, you really have to show what is the return for it. So for automation, as much as it is technical, lot of it is economical. You have to sit down, do the math, and figure out, which is the best approach where you can minimize a lot of money. So automation test leads have a tough time most of the time working out the economics. And as software engineers, we are much more confident in the technical area than we are with economics. So that's a real challenge that automation testers have to face. But actually, I'm done with all the topics that I wanted to show on QTP. So you're free to ask me any questions that you have. Okay. Tina, how is keyword different from data? What is test harness, parameterization, testing libraries? Keyword-driven approach is different from data-driven approach because in keyword-driven approach, you are actively looking at minimizing the extent of code that you write. So you're actively looking at minimizing the amount of, maximizing the extent of reusability. But if you're doing it in a data-driven mode, you're looking at reusing the same piece of code for enormous amount of data. So there are different approaches to handling or planning it. But as you might have guessed, not one approach works all the time. So you will have to do both things. But if you need more information, there is a 25-part tutorial on QTP on our site. So you can take a look at that. Frameworks are described in that as well. Now, what is test harness? Test harness is nothing but the entire framework. See, for you to perform test automation testing, you need a technical team, you need the infrastructure, you need the framework, you need licenses, you need the test management software, you need physical space, like a certain hard drive space. You will need a place to store the results. So all of that becomes your test harness. All the things that you require in order to be able to start testing is test harness. And test harness is a term that is used more in the context of automation testing. And parameterization is exactly this. So for a particular step in your test script, you will, instead of putting a constant data, you will add a parameter, and this parameter can take values from any table. So that's parameterization. And libraries is just a collection of all the reusable functions that you create in a automation testing framework. So testing is also to find about dependencies in the code or system. Can you tell me what this means? So this just means that sometimes when you are, again, I'm trying to think of a practical example. I don't know if I gave you this example in this class or not. There was one application where we used to content management system. I think I gave this example already, but I'll say this again. So there was one time I was testing a content management system, and what that does is you just give it, see, you cannot hire a web designer every day to update a website. So, and also changing HTML on a daily basis is not a good idea because that can break some things. So that's why there's this content publishing system. What that does is, whatever data you want to publish onto the site, you can give it to it either in the Word document format, PDF format, HTML format. All of these formats it will take it. You can specify what section of of the page this needs to go into and all that. At the end of the day, in a 24-hour cycle, there used to be a shell script that used to run, and all of this data used to get converted into HTML and appear on the site. So this is a content management system, and that's how it used to work. So while you're testing it, you kind of understand that this is, this shell script runs once 24 hours. Because normally if you tell that, it's a content management system, you would assume that you'll just give an HTML and the application will transform it and put it out on the website like immediately. But then when you test it, when you get involved with it, you understand that this kind of dependency on the shell script exists. So that's what it means. To learn Selenium, do we need to know Java? I would say yes. Technically speaking, going from version 1 to version 2 would happen when you're adding new requirements to the original software. What happens if after finishing UAT, someone realizes are missing, new requirements are decided to be added after UAT? Treated as version 2, automation testing and manual testing for new requirements. Yes, that's perfectly right. That's how it works. The order of testing is manual testing first and automation testing after manual testing part is done. Yes, that's perfectly true as well. So can we generate a report using QTP? Yes. See, this is the test execution report. You can actually export this into an XML format. See, you can do an export report and you can send it across to anybody that you like. So yes, that's possible. Any other questions, team? So how does it feel? Does QTP excite you, or does it make you feel intimidated? Well, that's good to hear because a lot of times it does also manage to intimidate. But for the most part, it's fun. At least when you're learning it, when you're writing the code, it is a lot of fun. And, there are some testers, again, including me, who miss that, the programming element, the coding element and all that. For us, this is like, a perfect cure. You can be a perfect mix of a tester and a developer while you're actually, involved in automation testing. So if for some reason, if you're missing out on the whole development thing, then I feel like this is a good to have skill and all that. Need some effort to learn it, and it looks interesting, but I think it'll need a lot of practice. Yes, it does. I mean, I remember when I was learning it for the first time, that was way back in, like, I don't know. I think the version of QTP that time was 9.2. Again, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was 9.2. It took me a week of completely, like, dedicated myself, like totally sitting at the laptop and working on QTP. It took me a week of it to actually get a hang of it and learn it to a certain extent. So it's definitely doable. It's definitely learnable. As I said, work your way through the menu. I found that really useful, so maybe you will too. So can you show me an example of QTP using Car Guruji website? Sure, you can actually, when you go for the See, sometimes this does not work very well with, browser-based thing, but let me try. So when I say record, I'll open. Yeah, any website is, that's what I'm saying. Internet Explorer, I have a lot of issues with it, so hopefully. Okay, I think I know what, it's not recording anything right now, but I'll show you why. So let's perform the search operation. I don't think I have a, valid version of Internet Explorer. That's why it's not recording anything. Yeah, I don't think I have a valid version. It actually supports a very old version of Internet Explorer. Let's try one last time. Let me do an analog recording. So maybe that will help us recognize it. So while you're recording, you just have to change it to an analog mode. So it will ask you, what screen do you want to record this relative to? This one. See, it's not even recognizing it as a web object. It is showing me that it is, a Windows object. So that's why QTP does not recognize it right now. But anyways, that's fine. So right now, when I have done an analog recording, I'll not be able to, edit any of the analog recording steps because it has just created, based on all the screen coordinates and everything. So if I run now, I have no idea what is going to happen, but it will click on few things. See, everything that I did with it, it recognizes and simply plays back. So see, that's a good question, Deepthi. So we got to see, the analog recording mode as well. So if it supports only an old version of IE, then how do companies test with the new IE versions? We don't have a choice. We have to install the older IE version that QTP supports, and that's what it'll, test with. And also I think this application does not have objects that QTP recognizes. I don't think it is really a problem with the browser. So let's try Gmail and see if QTP will recognize the Gmail objects or not. So it opened up the gmail.com page. Click on the create an account. No, it's not recognizing anything. No, it does not support Firefox. See here, only the browsers that they come displayed here, only they will be supported. So right now I have Internet Explorer and Chrome, but you see Chrome is not coming up in the list because it does not support Chrome at all. But this is supposed to happen. I don't know why. Let me try again. One last time. I have all the controls, okay. No, it's not recognizing it as a web application at all. It's looking at it as a Windows application. So yeah, I think it is the browser incompatibility thing. Yeah, I don't have a browser that we are working on. So yeah, it's not working right now. So while you're opening QTP, I can see list of checkboxes you can have. So do we have to check all of these? Yes, you will have to choose the corresponding, you will have to choose the corresponding add-ons that you want to include. Yes, you will have to do that. Can you go over my question? So yeah, what was that? Let me scroll up. So technically speaking, going from version 1 to version 2 would happen only when you're adding new requirements to original software after it has been in production for some times. What happens if after finishing UAT of version 1, someone realizes some important requirements are missing, or even worse, new requirements are decided to be added after UAT is completed? In this case, the new version of version 1 can be treated as version 2 and applied a combination of automation for test cases already tested and manual testing for new requirements. Yes, that's how it works. On the second one, the order of testing is manual testing first for new requirements and automation tested regression part after manual testing part is done. Yes, that's correct as well. So was there more to it? All right, cool. So any other questions, team? Also, please provide your, so tomorrow is the last session. Any questions that you want me to answer in the class tomorrow, interview related ones, please post it in the link that I just pinged you, and we'll answer all of them tomorrow. And yes, Sandhya sent me a questions via email. So we'll take these few questions. We do have time anyways. Defects can occur during test plan, design, and execution phase. So can you please give an example for the type of defects found during the test plan and design phase? So these are the kind of defects that you will find in, the documentation. Let's say if the BRD says instead of sign in, the button actually reads sign on. So that's a thing that you want it corrected. That's a defect. So you will go ahead and address it. So how do we do it? Do we do it in emails, Excel sheets, or how do we do it? Usually companies have like defect management software, so in that you can add it, or otherwise you can also send emails if that kind of software is not available, or you can actually bring it up during status meetings or anything. So all of those modes are possible depending on which one is most used by your company, and which mode is has a better chance of solution being found sooner. So all of that is same. So if the company uses Jira, I can use it. Yes, absolutely. So in the test cycle, round 1 is equal to testing, say of the 100 test cases, and round 2 is regression testing of 100 test cases plus checking if all the bugs reported during round 1 are fixed. So the whole bugs life cycle happens. So in the round 3, is there a complete regression pass after bugs discovered have been fixed? Also, how does the bug life cycle sync with the test cycle? Now, bug life cycle in the sense you will just update the status of the bug. See, by the time your round 2 comes, all your bugs will be in the fixed state. So it is just a matter of you going back and retesting and closing them. Now for round 2, if you still found some bugs, um, either they may get fixed, they may not get fixed. So if they are getting fixed, you'll have a day or two where you will get the new fixes, and you'll just test the bugs at that point of time. You'll not repeat the entire testing. But on the other hand, if they are insignificant bugs and the company has not decided to fix it, then at that point of time you have nothing else to do. Just you raise your bugs and all the issues will be in the deferred status. Okay? And bug life cycle doesn't actually have to sync with the test life cycle. Both of them are like independent things. As and when work happens on the bug life cycle gets updated. So can you expand on 100% test coverage? What does it mean? Is it referring to the test cases or execution, or both? It is both. So whenever you have a requirement, it has to be addressed for testing 100%. That means if there is a requirement, you have to design a test case around it, at least one. And if you've designed a test case around it, you will have to execute it at least once. So 100% test coverage is something which means that if there is a requirement, you will have to test it. You will have to design a test for it and eventually test it. So it is something that applies to both of these stages. Great, thank you. Those are great questions. Any other questions, team? Anything else that you want to discuss before we leave? So again, in today's email, I'll send out the link to the 25-part tutorial on QTP that we have. Definitely give it a chance. As an example, can you give a report on, I don't know what report, see that kind of testing tutorial we already have on our site, the end-to-end testing. We do have a lot of documentation, really. I don't have to create anything from the beginning. I mean, I pinged you this link already, but then if I haven't done so, you can check it here. So this is for an open, this is for an Orange HRM. It's an open source human resource management site that we have picked up and tested it end to end, creating like from the time of test plan creation, test execution, test case writing, all of that is incorporated in here. So give it a try. I'm sure that's what you're looking for. So how do you actually do the recording for old software developed in languages such as COBOL, for instance, where object technology? Yes. I did have to deal with that kind of a situation. So in that case, you will do the analog or low level recording, which is not great, which isn't, I wouldn't recommend doing that at all. But if nothing else works and you have to do automation, then that's the way to go about it. It's not optimal. I mean, it's a lot of it's a difficult task, automating screens that are not recognized as objects. Um, I wish we never have to test things like that, but for some reasons, I mean, there's always the pressure of, companies wanting one thing and we telling them it's not possible. So it always looks like we are making an excuse. But sometimes we have to work with what we have. So analog recording might not work in most of the case, but then you will have to try a low level. Low level is a little better than analog actually, so that might work. So in those cases, is regression done manually? To an extent possible, yes. Our case was there was this UAT happening. They had these reflex screens where they had to, big shipments used to come to the distribution center and they had to enter the barcode for each one of them. So in the real time scenario, what the store people used to do was they had this handheld barcode scanner and they used to scan the barcodes. But when we were doing UAT, we provided them with Excel sheets of those barcode data which they had to enter. And they weren't ready to enter because it was a lot of data and it used to take days at end to enter that information. I mean, it's like a whole big freight truck full of stuff and barcodes that they had to enter into the screens actually. So to make that process an automated thing, we had to bring in automation. So it will just enter the date, do the data entry for them. So it was not really in the context of regression that we automated in that case, just to, speed up the process. So it wasn't really that bad. All right. Okay, I think, at least this session has oriented you towards, automation, and you definitely, at least explore it and see how you feel about it. Any questions, please feel free to send me an email. And as I said, I got your resumes, few of your resumes. I'm yet to look at them. That's something that I do at the end of the session, end of the batch. So you will hear from me. If you've sent me a resume, you will hear from me on Wednesday or Thursday. Thanks again, team. Thank you all. You have a good one, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye, team.